In the early 2000s, the United States military operated some of the most powerful networks on Earth, systems designed to coordinate global defense, track satellites, and protect classified intelligence. They were not supposed to be vulnerable, they were not supposed to be reachable, and they were certainly not supposed to be open. We want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Comment below and subscribe. Yet somewhere in North London, inside a small bedroom, one man was quietly moving through those systems, undetected. No advanced malware, no insider access, no nation-state backing. Just a laptop, an internet connection, and a username with no password. As servers across the US Army, Navy, Air Force, and even NASA began to slow down and crash, administrators assumed hardware failure. Then files started disappearing, critical systems were taken offline, and someone left a message behind, a message that shouldn't have been there. What made this intrusion truly shocking wasn't the damage, it was how easy it had been. The hacker hadn't broken through digital walls. There were none. Doors were left unlocked, accounts still used default credentials, remote access systems were exposed to the open internet, and someone noticed. Within weeks, American officials were calling it the largest military hack of all time. They claimed damages in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some would later say it was far more serious than that. The Pentagon wanted answers, Congress wanted accountability, and intelligence agencies wanted the person responsible immediately. But when investigators traced the intrusion back to its source, what they found only deepened the embarrassment. Not a foreign intelligence service, not an organized hacking collective, not even a criminal syndicate. Just one man alone, in his bedroom. What followed would become a legal battle spanning more than a decade, involving two governments, massive public protests, and a question that still divides opinion today. Was this man a dangerous cybercriminal who humiliated the world's most powerful military, or proof that even the strongest empires can collapse because of simple human negligence? This is the story of the hacker who exposed the cracks in American military security without ever leaving his room. Gary McKinnon was not raised to become a hacker. He didn't come from a background of intelligence agencies, underground networks, or elite universities. He grew up in Glasgow and later London, fascinated by science, technology, and the unanswered questions of the universe. As a child, he was introverted, deeply curious, and often isolated. Computers became his refuge, a place where systems made sense, even when people didn't. By the late 1990s, McKinnon was working ordinary jobs, struggling to find stability. What he did have was time, a growing understanding of computer networks, and an obsession that would come to define his life. Unidentified flying objects, government secrecy. The belief that somewhere inside classified systems, the truth was being hidden. McKinnon wasn't chasing money, he wasn't stealing data to sell. He wasn't trying to prove a political point, he believed he was searching for answers. Later diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, McKinnon processed the world differently. He fixated intensely on specific subjects. Once something captured his interest, letting go became almost impossible. At night, while most of London slept, he scanned the internet for unsecured systems. Not targets, just open doors. When he found one, curiosity pulled him further inside. He didn't see himself as a criminal. In his mind, he was an explorer, quietly looking through digital corridors, convinced that if something truly world-changing existed, it would eventually reveal itself. Friends and family would later describe him as gentle, non-confrontational, and almost painfully naive about the consequences of his actions. He underestimated the scale of the systems he was accessing. and he vastly underestimated the reaction of the people protecting them. To Gary McKinnon, these networks were just computers. To the United States government, they were the backbone of national defense. This gap between intention and impact would soon become catastrophic, because when curiosity meets negligence inside military systems, intent stops mattering. What matters is access, and Gary McKinnon had more access than anyone realized. To understand how a single civilian could access some of the most sensitive networks in the world, you have to understand the internet as it existed in the early 2000s. This was a time before large-scale cyber warfare, before ransomware empires, before zero-trust security models. The internet was still treated as a tool, not a battlefield. After the Cold War, many U.S. military networks were expanded rapidly. New systems were connected for efficiency, collaboration, and speed. Security, in many cases, was an afterthought. Administrators prioritized uptime over protection. Systems were deployed quickly, default configurations were rarely changed. Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP, was widely used to manage machines from afar. In theory, it was secure. In practice, many systems were left exposed to the open internet, protected only by weak, reused, or even blank passwords. Firewalls were inconsistent, intrusion detection systems were primitive. Logging was often incomplete or ignored, and most critically, there was an assumption that no one would look. The idea that an outsider, let alone a civilian from another country, would actively scan military IP ranges seemed unthinkable. Security models were built around trust, not hostility. Then came September 11, 2001. In the chaos that followed, military networks were pushed even harder. Access was expanded, restrictions were loosened. Speed mattered more than caution. Ironically, this made systems even more vulnerable. At the same time, tools for scanning the internet became freely available. Anyone with basic technical knowledge could search for open machines. No exploits required, no sophisticated attacks, just patience. Gary McKinnon didn't need to defeat security systems. He simply found machines where none existed. This wasn't a failure of technology. It was a failure of process, of policy, of human behavior. The US military was preparing for physical threats, missiles, bombs, aircraft. What it wasn't prepared for was someone quietly knocking on every digital door, waiting for one to open. And thousands of them did. This was the environment in which the largest military intrusion of its time would unfold. Not because the attacker was extraordinary, but because the defenses were ordinary. Contrary to how Hollywood portrays hacking, Gary McKinnon did not break into US military systems using sophisticated exploits or cutting-edge tools. There were no zero-day vulnerabilities, no custom malware, no advanced encryption attacks. What he used instead was far more dangerous: negligence. McKinnon began by scanning large blocks of IP addresses associated with US government and military organizations. This process wasn't illegal in itself. It was simply a way of asking one question again and again: is anyone home? When a machine responded, he looked for remote desktop access. If it was open, he tried to log in often. He didn't have to try very hard. Many systems still use default administrator accounts. Some had passwords like admin. Others had no password at all. In several cases, McKinnon later stated that he simply pressed enter and was granted full control. Once inside, he had administrator-level access. That meant he could browse files, create user accounts, copy data, and in some cases, delete system logs. And that's exactly what he did. He moved slowly, carefully, sometimes spending hours inside a single machine. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't trying to cause chaos. He was searching. McKinnon navigated networks belonging to the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, and NASA. He accessed systems connected to military bases, research facilities, and satellite operations. On several machines, he left messages behind, partly as a warning, partly out of frustration. One message read, "Your security is crap." Another warned administrators that their systems were wide open and vulnerable to far more dangerous attackers. But from the perspective of U.S. authorities, this wasn't a warning. It was vandalism. In some cases, McKinnon deleted critical system files. He later claimed this was accidental, the result of unfamiliar operating systems and poorly documented environments. The U.S. military disagreed. According to official statements, his actions caused entire networks to be shut down. At one naval base, administrators reportedly lost access to more than 300 computers. At another location, military operations were disrupted for days. The most serious allegation involved a U.S. Army system in Germany, where officials claimed McKinnon deleted files controlling ammunition logistics, temporarily grounding military vehicles. Whether this damage was intentional or accidental remains disputed. What is not disputed is access. McKinnon had unrestricted, unauthorized access to systems that should never have been reachable from the public internet. And he stayed inside those systems for months. Sometimes he connected remotely while watching television. Sometimes late at night, sometimes during the day. He wasn't hiding his activity with sophisticated anonymization. He didn't use VPN chains or proxy networks. Incredibly, he assumed no one was watching, and for a long time, no one was. This is what made the intrusion so humiliating. Not only had the world's most powerful military been breached, it hadn't even noticed. No alarms sounded. No immediate response followed. McKinnon came and went freely, leaving behind altered systems, missing files, and unanswered questions. By the time administrators finally realized something was wrong, the damage had already been done. And the realization that followed was far worse than the breach itself. If one man, with no resources and no advanced tools, could access these systems so easily, who else already had? Once Gary McKinnon was inside U.S. military and government networks, his focus narrowed. He wasn't looking for troop movements, he wasn't searching for weapon systems. He wasn't interested in classified battle plans, he was looking for evidence. Specifically, evidence that governments were hiding information about unidentified flying objects, and possibly something far more extraordinary. McKinnon later claimed that while browsing NASA systems, he discovered high-resolution satellite images showing objects he believed were not of human origin. He said the images were stored in a folder labeled RAW, unprocessed files that had not yet been altered or blurred for public release. Before he could copy them, the system allegedly disconnected. The images were gone. He would later describe seeing a metallic, cigar-shaped object hovering above Earth smooth, with no visible seams or propulsion. No proof of these images has ever surfaced. What McKinnon did manage to capture were spreadsheets on a U.S. Navy system. He claimed to find a document titled Non-Terrestrial Officers. The list allegedly contained names and ranks that did not correspond to any known military personnel. Another spreadsheet referenced fleet-to-fleet transfers, not ship-to-ship, fleet-to-fleet. To McKinnon, this was confirmation. To the U.S. government, it was fantasy. Authorities have consistently denied the existence of such files and dismissed the claims as misinterpretations or fabrications. No official documentation supporting McKinnon's assertions has ever been verified. And that's where the controversy lives. Because what matters isn't whether the files were real. It's that he believed they were. This belief shaped his actions. It drove him deeper into restricted systems. And it blinded him to the danger he was placing himself in. From the outside, McKinnon's claims sound extraordinary. But within the context of his obsession, they felt inevitable. He wasn't hacking for power, he was chasing revelation. Yet from the perspective of national security agencies, intent was irrelevant, access alone was the threat. The idea that a civilian had navigated classified networks, regardless of what he believed he found, was unacceptable. And worse, his claims triggered a different kind of fear, not fear of aliens, but fear of exposure. Because if McKinnon could wander freely through these systems, others could too. People who wouldn't stop at looking, people who wouldn't leave warnings, people who wouldn't talk to the media. Whether McKinnon uncovered secrets or illusions remains unresolved. But his story revealed something far more concrete. The most sensitive networks on Earth had been open long enough for anyone curious enough to walk inside. For months, Gary McKinnon moved through U.S. military systems without resistance. No alerts, no warnings, no immediate consequences. That silence didn't mean nothing was wrong. It meant no one was looking closely enough. The first signs appeared as technical anomalies, systems running slower than expected, files failing to load, network instability that couldn't be easily explained. At first, administrators blamed routine problems, outdated hardware, misconfigurations, simple human error. Military networks were vast. Small failures were common, but the issues didn't stop. On several systems, critical files were missing, logs had been altered or erased. User accounts appeared that no one remembered creating. Then someone noticed the messages, short, blunt, unmistakable. "Your security is crap." That was the moment curiosity turned into alarm. Internal investigations began quietly. Administrators compared logs. They traced connections backward through IP addresses and timestamps. The pattern was impossible to ignore. The access wasn't internal. It wasn't coming from a base or a contractor. It was coming from outside the United States. And not just once, again, and again and again. As the scope of the intrusion became clear, the tone changed. What had started as a technical issue was now treated as a national security incident. Entire networks were taken offline, passwords were reset across thousands of machines. Remote access was abruptly disabled. The U.S. military began emergency containment. By this point, McKinnon was already gone, but the damage, both technical and psychological, remained. Investigators followed the digital trail across the Atlantic. The IP addresses pointed to a residential internet connection in London, not an embassy, not a server farm, a home. The realization was staggering. One of the largest security breaches in U.S. military history had originated from a civilian bedroom in the United Kingdom. American authorities escalated the case immediately. This was no longer a matter for system administrators. Federal agencies became involved. The Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, and soon, the FBI. For the U.S. government, the embarrassment was severe. Public acknowledgement meant admitting systemic failure. But silence wasn't an option. They wanted accountability. They wanted a name, and now, they had one. Make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss what happens next. Once U.S. authorities identified Gary McKinnon as the source of the intrusions, the tone of the case shifted dramatically. This was no longer about damaged computers or missing files. It was about deterrence. The United States wanted to send a message. In 2002, British authorities arrested McKinnon at the request of the U.S. government. His computers were seized. Hard drives were taken away for forensic analysis. For McKinnon, the arrest came as a shock. Until that moment, he believed his actions would be treated as minor digital trespassing if they were noticed at all. Instead, he was facing something far more serious. U.S. prosecutors charged him with multiple counts of unauthorized access to military and government systems. The charges carried a potential sentence of up to 70 years in prison. 70 years for a non-violent offense. For actions committed without weapons, threats, or financial gain. American officials described the intrusion as the largest military hack of all time. They claimed damages exceeding hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some statements suggested the figure was much higher. McKinnon denied causing intentional harm. He admitted accessing systems without permission, but insisted his goal had never been sabotage. That distinction didn't matter. From the U.S. perspective, the case had become symbolic. If a foreign civilian could breach military networks without facing severe consequences, what precedent would that set? The United States formally requested McKinnon's extradition under the UK-US extradition treaty. If approved, he would be transferred to the United States to stand trial in federal court. For McKinnon, extradition was more terrifying than the charges themselves. He would be alone in a foreign prison system, facing a legal process he didn't understand. His mental health deteriorated rapidly. Doctors warned that extradition posed a serious risk to his life. McKinnon fell into severe depression. He spoke openly about suicide. What had started as a technical case was now becoming a human one. And it was about to ignite one of the most controversial extradition battles in modern British legal history. The fight over Gary McKinnon's extradition would last more than 10 years. It became a legal war between two nations, and a personal nightmare for one man. Under the UK-US extradition treaty signed after 9/11, the United States did not need to present full evidence before requesting extradition from the United Kingdom. British courts were not allowed to examine the strength of the American case. They could only decide one thing: was the paperwork in order? For McKinnon's defense team, this was the first shock. The treaty was unbalanced. A British citizen could be sent to the United States with minimal scrutiny, while the reverse required far stricter standards. As hearings dragged on year after year, McKinnon's mental health continued to decline. Medical experts diagnosed him with severe depression and Asperger's syndrome. They warned repeatedly that extradition could lead to suicide. These warnings were not hypothetical. McKinnon attempted to take his own life. His mother, Janice Sharp, became his most visible advocate. She spoke to the media, organized campaigns, and confronted politicians directly. Her message was simple: this punishment does not fit the crime. Public support grew rapidly. Thousands signed petitions demanding the UK government block the extradition. Celebrities, journalists, and human rights organizations joined the cause. Even some British politicians began to question the treaty itself. Why should a non-violent British citizen be sent overseas when the alleged crimes could be prosecuted at home? The United States refused to back down. American prosecutors argued that the damage was too severe, that military readiness had been compromised, that extradition was essential. Behind the scenes, the case became politically sensitive. Blocking the extradition risked angering a powerful ally. Allowing it risked destroying a vulnerable man. Court after court rejected McKinnon's appeals. The legal process seemed unstoppable. And yet, the pressure kept building. The case wasn't just about hacking anymore. It was about sovereignty, human rights, and whether justice should be blind to mental health. By the early 2010s, the decision could no longer be ignored. The final call would not be made by a judge. It would be made by a politician. As the extradition battle dragged on, the story of Gary McKinnon captured headlines across the United Kingdom and beyond. Journalists framed him in different ways: a dangerous cybercriminal, a naive tech enthusiast, or, in some cases, a modern-day whistleblower exposing government secrets. Public protests began to form. Outside courts and government offices, crowds gathered with banners and slogans. One sign read simply, "Don't extradite Gary." Campaigns went online as well. Petitions spread across social media platforms, gathering tens of thousands of signatures. Supporters argued that sending McKinnon to the U.S. would be disproportionate, cruel, and unnecessary. Political figures started weighing in. Some criticized the extradition treaty itself, calling it outdated and unfair. Others expressed concern for McKinnon's mental health, emphasizing that the human cost could not be ignored. The media played a pivotal role in shaping public opinion. News outlets highlighted the disparity between the scale of the alleged crimes and the potential consequences, up to 70 years in a foreign prison. Feature articles focused on his Asperger's syndrome, depression, and the psychological toll of a decade-long legal struggle. Across the country, ordinary citizens debated the story. Was McKinnon a harmless curiosity seeker who stumbled into trouble, or a serious threat to national security? The case also sparked wider discussions about cybersecurity and government transparency. Some questioned whether the U.S. military networks were truly secure if a lone individual could access them so easily. Others wondered about the moral obligations of those who uncover sensitive information. This public discourse created a unique pressure on the British government. For the first time, extradition was not just a legal question, it had become a political and social one. Gary McKinnon became more than a hacker, he became a symbol, a test of fairness, human rights, and the balance between security and justice. And while the US government continued to insist on his extradition, the growing support for McKinnon in the UK made it clear that this fight would not be decided in courtrooms alone. Public sentiment had shifted. The quiet bedroom hacker had sparked a debate far larger than anyone could have anticipated. After more than a decade of legal battles, hearings, and public debate, the question remained: would Gary McKinnon ever be sent to the United States? The answer came in 2012, in a decision that surprised many, but reflected a growing awareness of human rights in extradition law. The UK Home Secretary, Theresa May, announced that she would block McKinnon's extradition. Her reasoning was clear. Sending a man with Asperger's syndrome and severe depression to face a potential 70-year prison sentence in a foreign country posed a real risk to his life. Medical evidence had played a crucial role. Doctors testified that the psychological stress and isolation of the American prison system could push McKinnon toward suicide. For the first time, the human cost outweighed political pressure. The decision marked a turning point in how extradition cases were approached in the UK. It acknowledged that justice is not only about the law, but also about the individual being affected. The US government expressed disappointment but respected the decision. No formal charges were brought against McKinnon in the United Kingdom. Instead, prosecutors issued warnings, and McKinnon was able to continue his life in relative peace. For Gary McKinnon, the victory was bittersweet. He had won the legal battle, but the stress, uncertainty, and media scrutiny of over a decade had left deep scars. The experience transformed him from a curious hacker into a symbol of the human consequences of cybercrime prosecution. The case also sparked broader debates. Could someone with the skills to access sensitive networks be prosecuted fairly without risking their mental health? Should mental illness and neurodivergence be considered in international legal cases? McKinnon's story didn't just end with the blocked extradition. It reshaped policies, influenced public perception, and highlighted the fragile balance between justice, security, and compassion. For the first time, The world saw that cybercrime is not only a question of technology or legality. It is a story of humanity, intention, and consequences. And while the United States had hoped to make an example of him, the United Kingdom had sent a different message. Law and justice must account for the individual, even in a world increasingly dominated by digital power and global security concerns. Gary McKinnon would never walk into a U.S. courtroom, but the legacy of his actions and the international debate they inspired continues to this day. Gary McKinnon's story did not end with the blocked extradition. In many ways, it had only just begun, in the form of a lasting legacy that continues to influence cybersecurity, legal systems, and public perception. For the U.S. military, the breach was a wake-up call. Network administrators realized that even the most sophisticated systems could be exposed by simple mistakes, default passwords, unsecured remote access, and inadequate monitoring. Policies were rewritten, systems were hardened, and the concept of assume everything is vulnerable became standard procedure. For cybersecurity professionals around the world, McKinnon became a case study. Not for his skill, which, while impressive, relied on curiosity and persistence rather than technical sophistication, but for his ability to exploit human error. The lesson was clear: even small oversights could have global consequences. The case also sparked debate over the treatment of neurodivergent individuals in law enforcement. McKinnon's Asperger's syndrome and mental health challenges were central to the decision to block extradition. His situation highlighted the need for legal systems to consider the human and psychological impact of prosecution, especially in international cases. Public perception of hackers began to shift as well. McKinnon was not a criminal mastermind seeking profit or political gain. He was an explorer, a seeker of truth, and a man whose curiosity had collided with the digital infrastructure of a superpower. This narrative encouraged nuanced conversations about ethics, intent, and responsibility in the digital age. And then there is the cultural impact. McKinnon inspired documentaries, books, and discussions in mainstream media. He became a symbol of David versus Goliath, one individual challenging massive institutions, highlighting systemic vulnerabilities, and forcing governments to confront their own weaknesses. Perhaps most importantly, his story forced governments to ask themselves difficult questions. Are national security systems truly secure? Are laws and treaties fair in the digital era? And what happens when human curiosity meets advanced technology? Today, Gary McKinnon's hack is studied not just as an incident in cybersecurity history, but as a story of unintended consequences, ethical ambiguity, and the enduring tension between curiosity and control. From one small bedroom in London, a single person exposed cracks in global defense networks. He reminded the world that power is not just measured in technology, but also in the responsibility and diligence of those who wield it. Gary McKinnon's story ends not with a courtroom, but with a reflection. One laptop, one bedroom in London. One individual capable of navigating the digital arteries of the world's most powerful military. This was not a tale of spies or hackers for hire. It was a story of curiosity, obsession, and the fragile human systems that underpin even the most formidable empires. The U.S. military networks, designed to withstand sophisticated attacks, were undone not by cutting-edge technology, but by oversight and complacency. In the process, one man's search for truth created a global spectacle, a legal battle, a media frenzy, and a public debate spanning continents. McKinnon himself never intended to cause chaos. He wasn't seeking revenge, he wasn't looking to profit. He was simply following a trail that only he seemed to see, a quest for answers about the unknown, about UFOs, about the secrets hidden in plain sight. And yet, the consequences were immense. Policies changed, systems were secured, international law was challenged, and the conversation about cybersecurity, mental health, and ethical responsibility was forever altered. In a digital age, where empires are built on ones and zeros, McKinnon's story reminds us that a single individual can reveal the cracks in even the strongest institutions. It is a story of vulnerability and power, curiosity and consequence, human error and ingenuity, one laptop, one bedroom. And a lesson the world cannot forget. No system is infallible, no empire is untouchable, and sometimes the smallest actions, driven by the most human of motives, can echo louder than the mightiest forces on earth. What do you think about this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Support the channel by subscribing and sharing this story with your friends. It helps a lot.